Meeting Ron Paul by Gregory Brandt. I once met Ron Paul in 2008. It was during the Republican primary in Austin, Texas on the University of Texas campus. I was a full-time student at UT at this time, and even though I wasn't a hardcore Republican, not even close, I liked Ron Paul because I remember seeing a van that said Ron Paul for President in 1988 and the art house movie Slacker by Richard Linklater. Apparently Ron Paul had ran for president before. The main reason I went to the rally was because I was enrolled in a photography course taught by the shortest, snobbiest, most pretentious professor I had ever had. The guy was a 60-something-year-old with a high-pitched voice, and he didn't like me from the start. It was a large class, and for whatever reason, I sat near the front of the class. I'd usually always sit in the back, not because I wanted to, but every time I tried to sit up front, me just being in the line of sight of other students was a huge distraction. Women have always looked at me in a good way, but frat boys living off their mommy and daddy like to stare at me in a mean, intimidating way. I quickly realized it was best if I just sat in the back, especially for the large classes. I was 26 when I started UT, and as I mentioned in my book, Gonzo Education, 95% of all the undergraduates were under the age of 25. So I was basically a senior citizen to them. Most people couldn't tell that I was a few years older than them. Being good-looking actually confused them because most good-looking people look youthful. Ha ha ha, look at me now, guys. You ever see any 43-year-olds that look like me? Guessing not. You got to understand that throughout my 20s, women would always tell me, quote unquote, that I'm beautiful. At the time, I didn't really like being called beautiful, and I would literally tell any woman that referred to me as such to shut up. This was my response. Now, the photography class, photography is supposed to be subjective, but this pretentious instructor acted like every picture I took wasn't up to his standards. The guy was known for dating his students, and I heard he actually left his wife for a student. On the first day of class, he told us he didn't want to see a single cat picture from any of us, so as you can imagine, we immediately got off to a rough start. The entire class semester, he never taught us anything about photography. He just showed people's photos during the class. There were about 300 people in the class, and he promised all of us we'd get multiple photos shown to the class, but he only played my picture once the whole semester, less than every other student. It was sad the little old man was trying so hard to be hip. He hated my guts. This was when camo cargo pants came out. I had a few different pairs. One day the instructor comes in wearing a similar pair and he just stands in front of the class like we're supposed to notice his camo shorts and say something. Then, I swear to God, the little guy says in his high-pitched voice, "I originally was going to pull the pants away like I was a stripper and rip them off of you guys. Like, ah." I was like, what the fuck? Like a stripper? Did this guy think he was the first 4-foot-tall Chippendales dancer? Chippendale was actually a nickname I had when working at Golden Corral. The Latinos in the kitchen would call me Chippendale because they liked how I looked. Everybody had to buy an expensive SLR camera for this class, and luckily I got one very cheap from a Russian who claimed it fell off of a truck. The 300 class was broken off into about 10 study sessions, which had about 30 students each. This is where we actually went over the particular elements of photography. The reason I even bring up this class and the asshole who taught it is because when I look back at some of the photos I took on stage with Ron Paul, I couldn't believe how good they were, but none of them were showed to the class because the sad excuse of a man teaching it had a personal vendetta against me. I remember the grad student teaching our particular study class was very impressed. He asked how I got access to Ron Paul and being on stage in front of thousands of people. The grad student teaching the study session didn't hate me like the main teacher did. The main photography teacher's name, that little prick, was Dennis Darling. Imagine having the last name Darling. I guess this douche is in his 70s now and even more of a scumbag than he was before. He was probably the most well-known photography teacher at UT, but not necessarily for his teaching ability, more for his scumminess. So I showed up to the Ron Paul rally with a camera around my neck. I met an attractive brunette and she tagged along with me and got to go on stage too. We were standing there side by side with Ron Paul, his wife, and I'm guessing what was his grandkids. I took award-winning photos of Ron Paul on stage, and then I turned my attention to the crowd. My camera was so good, the lighting was great, and I took some of the best pictures I had taken in my whole life. The girl I had just met, you know, she was very attractive and rested her backside on me. She was very impressed how I was able to get us on stage. I was winning that day more than any day Dennis Darling has ever had in his pretentious life. When the rally ended, Ron Paul's grandkids asked who we were, and we introduced ourselves as UT students, and they introduced us to their famous grandfather. I shook his hand and then immediately went to the FAC building where they had early voting set up and cast my vote for him. It was the only time in my life I ever voted Republican, and it was the only time in my life I shook a presidential candidate's hand and then immediately voted for him. I ended up voting for Obama in the general election, but most of the students actually supported Hillary Clinton at this time. I remember there were a bunch of Hillary Clinton supporters mocking us as we left the Ron Paul rally. Some tough girl in front was saying, "I'm Ron Paul, I deliver babies." But here are some of the shots I took. As you can see, they're really good, and I'm really proud of it. Everybody, if you want to learn more about me, check out my book, Gonzo Education. Have a great day.